Zach. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate. Niggas don't know what to think. Thought I get money, you change. What you thought we was the same? Still stay away from them clones. Niggas better leave me alone. Talking about niggas as low. Run with niggas who don't know you. Whoa, I make that zagging when city to city. You niggas not hot in your state. If it was money to get a hit Henny, we get it and never complain. Same go for the gang, and we split it up all the same. I can't really eat, let's stay straight, cause we go way back in the day. My day ones from back in the day, they still hang around me today. You wanna come round us, you can't. I'm rolling up loud, it's great. But mama, she bad but complain, cause I'm too in love with my dreams. And I gotta get on the plane, and go get this money with Gigi. I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang.
I get the bag with the gang, taking that Zach to the bank. Henny be all in my drink. You niggas is stupid, you think that shit change? You not even hot in your gang. Ain't nothing even hot about your gang. You niggas be lying about same. Be posting them pictures of guns for the fame. Niggas just look at me different now. Say that's your man, but he a clown. Don't fuck around with the fuck arounds. Little nigga, you should cut it out. Me and my niggas take different routes. Punch a bitch nigga all in his mouth. Hold up my nigga, we different now. I need a Robert, this is my style. I get a check today, I spent it all tomorrow. I get a bitch today, she probably a foreign model. I get a check today, I spent it all tomorrow. I'm with my gang today, tomorrow never promise.
OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang. OG, I draw up the plate, and then he go get the cake. Then we link up with the gang, gang, gang.
I think I'm cute, I know I'm sexy. I've got the look that drives the girls wild. I got the moves that really move them. I send chills up and down their spines. I'm just a sexy boy, I'm not your boy toy. I'm just a sexy boy, I'm not your boy toy. I make them hot, I make them shiver. These get weak whenever I'm around. They see me walk, they hear me talk. I make them feel like their God ain't real. I'm just a sexy boy, I'm not your boy toy. I'm just a sexy boy, I'm not your boy toy. That might girls, hands off the merchandise. I'm just a sexy boy, I'm not your boy toy. I'm just a sexy boy, I'm not your boy toy. I'm just a sexy boy, I'm not your boy toy. I'm just a sexy boy, not your boy toy. I'm just a sexy boy. I'm not your boy toy. I'm just a sexy boy. I'm not your boy toy. Welcome everybody to a special edition of the Pocket Locker podcast and the return of a true community favorite, the Atheist Crew Book Club. All right, I was just checking to make sure our sound was all right here. All right, and folks, I'm really excited about this. We haven't had this series in a little bit here, but I have a new book that I'm reading for my class at Minnesota State, particularly Normandale Community College, and I think the book is like a good read for our community. Because of so many of the issues that come up, and I think it really speaks to it. So I'm really excited about it.
Yet more.
So I decided impromptu to do a little stream here. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm really excited. Before we do, let's go ahead and get into our communion here real quick. I hope you guys are having a good day. Hope everybody's feeling good. Hope everybody's relaxed. Please come link up with the gang. Of course, we're in Gather at the Bundy Ranch in our virtual office. I want to thank everybody that's been hanging out today. We've had a good crew today. YouTube Punk and Carrie Ann and Cameron and James and Melody. And Sean. So appreciate all y'all. Definitely link up with us. Appreciate everybody else that's in and out of Gather, of course. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Please raise your glasses and hang on to your asses. Through him, with him, in the unity of the flying man. All glory and honor is yours who flight for our sins forever and ever. You may drink. Gang, and this one is the Cheers theme song. It comes to us from Foy Vance. It's called Where Everybody Knows Your Name.
In Dublin, and he's going to play us out. You're going to play what to finish us up?
Do you know what? I don't know the name of this song actually, but I know the song, and so will you.
Oh, I look forward to this. Foy Vance, take it away.
Making your way in the world today takes everything you got. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away? Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. And they're always glad you came. You wanna be
I got Melody
where
Joy
you can
first.
see. Troubles are all the same. You wanna go where everybody knows your name. Well, all those nights
10,000 pocket change, appreciate you.
and the check is in the mail, and your little
KCA Randy,
angel
second.
on the collared by its tail. Your third fiance didn't show. Well, sometimes you wanna go where
And YouTube Punk
everybody
is
knows
third.
your name. And you're always glad they came. You wanna be where you can
I got
see.
Crystal in the chat and
Troubles are all the
AR.
same. You wanna go
Liz Allen is
where
here.
everybody
Caterpillar's
knows
here.
your name.
None is here. Appreciate all you.
Well, you get out of bed and the coffee's dead. The morning isn't looking bright. You shrink right off to Europe and he doesn't even write. Your girlfriend says she's not a girl. Be glad there's one place in the world where everybody knows your name. And they're always glad you came. You wanna
Hit
be
that like
where
button,
you
y'all.
can
Appreciate
see.
it. Appreciate it.
Troubles are all the
Definitely.
same. You wanna go where everybody knows your name. You wanna be where you can see. Troubles are all the same. You wanna go where everybody knows your name.
Boy, Vance. Most common word coming in by text, boy, is goosebumps. Believe it or not, we've had that repeatedly across a whole series. If you want to see Foy Vance's cheeky grin when he sang the line, "When you find your girlfriend is..."
All right. As I said, we are linked up and gather. You can come join us right there. And that's the, see the gang linked up with me right now. It's AR and Melody Joy, YouTube Punk. Appreciate y'all. All right, gang, let's get back into the Atheist Crew Book Club. And this time we've got, boom, that's right, not an audio book, a real life physical book in the flesh. All right, it's Sean Carroll's, The Story of Life. I guess I have this cool little, I don't know, I got the little advanced reading copy they sent me, but this is the book for the course I'm teaching at Normandale Community College. And actually, our students, man, this is kind of a Howard class. So it's a survey class. I think it's called Survey of Biology. It's basically a course for non-majors who are at this community college. They're mostly first years, some second years, and then some high school students who are like getting college credits while they're finishing their high school. I think they're juniors or seniors in high school. Sort of very different than my teaching assignment last semester. I was teaching a Darwin's Law, which is a senior seminar at Michigan State University for a very small class with Rob Pennock. Most of our students were on their way to med school. So most of our students in this class will transfer to a four-year institution. A lot of them will hopefully end up at the University of Minnesota. For these who don't actually work at the University of Minnesota as a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Ecology, Evolutionary Biology, and Behavior. The Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior. It's slightly different. EEB, we call it, EEB. And the program I'm in which is the Institutional Research in Academic Career Development Award or something. It's like a program run by the NIH that funds my postdoc and requires us to do some mentored teaching at partner institutions in the Minnesota area, right? So it's like universities that the university has, it's like community colleges that the university has partnered with because they're part of the Minnesota state system. And so we like teach there as part of our teaching experience, and that's what helps funds our research. So I'm teaching at Normandale Community College. My class is online and it's asynchronous, very much like a class would be in our community. Our students they have a textbook that they have to go through and respond to questions and quizzes from. They have a final project. They have a lab. They have like a whole lab kit. They have to do labs at home. It's quite an involved course. But for my portion, they have to read The Story of Life by Sean Carroll and discuss it online in sort of small groups, sort of like an online book club or journal club. And my role is to facilitate those online group discussions and grade their participation in those discussions, which hopefully permits me, some time to do the other things I need to do this semester. But I'm excited about that, and I think this is a great book. And one of the interesting things about it's called The Story of Life. The subtitle is Great Discoveries in Biology, and it uses narratives. It tells stories of great scientists and I guess sort of their process and what that whole deal's about. So I'm really kind of interested in that. And I think given the level of conversations in our community where so many scientific concepts come up, but the fundamental nature of science is often so poorly understood and therefore often grossly misrepresented, I thought this book would be a good one for the community to get into because it's really going to allow us to talk about the philosophy of science, the process of science, what scientific journeys really look like, and a little bit more about the life of actual scientists. And I think that that's a kind of perspective that's missing out here because these conversations tend to get caught up in the weeds in sort of these graduate level conversations that really are jumping way ahead of ourselves because we're not on the same page about the basics. So hopefully this book will help us get into it. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to start with the About the Author section. Sean B. Carroll is an evolutionary biologist, just like this guy right here, author, educator, and film producer. He is vice president for science education at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the Simon Bello Professor of Biology at the University of Maryland, and Professor Emeritus at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He has previously written several books, including The Serengeti Rules, Brave Genius, Endless Forms Most Beautiful, Into the Jungle, and Remarkable Creatures. And he is the executive producer of more than a dozen feature documentary films. He is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the American Philosophical Society, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has received the Distinguished Service Award from the National Association of Biology Teachers. For my part, I'll say this. Being a member of the National Academy of Sciences doesn't get any more prestigious than that. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences, that's also known as AAAS. They produce, I believe, Science or Nature, and I think Science. And they, another, again, top-notch organization. Like when you're nominated as a member of one of these organizations, it's a huge deal for you, your department, everybody that knows you, everybody that's ever collaborated with you. So Sean Carroll's got great awards here. And also shout out to the National Association of Biology Teachers. I've attended some of their conferences, been able to, I was actually like filming some stuff. I was like documenting some of the sessions they had there for the organization I worked for when I went to grad school. And yeah, I loved it, learned a great deal, and I hope to really spend, the rest of my days associating with the National Association of Biology Teachers. Really, really great organization, and always a privilege to work with, science teachers that are that serious and that engaged, when you're doing the research. So. Really, really great to have those organizations there. And about the author, and we are going to go ahead. There's a little bit of a preface here, which is called Why Stories. I think that's an important theme here. So I'm going to go ahead and rock with that. Appreciate all y'all also answering the question of the day. Go ahead and let me know if you had heard of Sean Carroll. Pragmatic said yes. Cameron Bennett, sort of. Appreciate that. Some of you may have seen some of his YouTube videos. He's got a great one called God is Not a Good Theory. Maybe we should check that out on stream at some point. All right, so why stories? And there's a quote in here from a Native American proverb. Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. Lewis got an attack of the flu and retired to bed. And so it came about that on the morning of the 17th of July, I went out of my bed. I went out by myself with the two Dalmatians, Sally and Victoria, to see what I could find of interest at nearby bed eye exposures. I turned my steps towards a site not far west of the junction of two gorges. There was indeed plenty of material lying on the eroded surface. Some, no doubt, as a result of the rains earlier that year. But one scrap of bone that caught and held my eye was not lying loose on the surface, but projecting from beneath. It seemed to be part of a skull. I carefully brushed away a little bit of the deposit, and then I could see parts of two large teeth in place in the upper jaw. They were hominid. It was a hominid skull, apparently in situ, and there was a lot of it there. I rushed back to camp shouting out, "I've got him! I've got him! I've got him!" "Got what? Are you hurt?" Lewis asked. "Him, the man, our man," I said. "The one we've been looking for. Come quick." All right. One woman combing a hillside in Africa for scraps of bone does not arouse the stomach-churning fear of a soldier charging up a heavily fortified beach in France, or the nail-biting suspense of a piloted spacecraft approaching the surface of the moon. But this personal moment of discovery was just as great a turning point as the Normandy or moon landings, for it would also rewrite human history. The story of Mary Leakey's account of the morning of Friday, July 17th, 1959, when at age 46 she found what she and her husband Lewis had been seeking for 24 years, indisputable evidence that Africa was the cradle of humanity. Up until that moment, the question of the origin of humans was wide open, with most evidence and a great deal of cultural bias pointing away from Africa and toward Asia. The fragmented skull was the reward for the indefatigable Oh God, I said that horribly. Efforts of those two, indefatigable efforts of those two brave pioneers who were willing to live most of their lives in the bush in the hope of finding something that would upend not only the scientific world but society at large. The story of Mary and Louis Leakey is one of the 19 stories that make up the story of life. You may wonder why stories of life and why these stories in particular. Those are good questions that I will address in a moment, but the essence of the rationale for this book is captured by a statement made by another pioneer whose discovery is chronicled here. With his partner, Francis Crick, James D. Watson discovered the base pairing rules that were the key to the double helix structure, the function of DNA, and the mechanism of heredity. He gave an interview on the 15th anniversary of his and Crick's momentous discovery. Interviewer, what are you most proud of? Watson, my textbook, The Molecular Biology of the Gene, and my book, The Double Helix. Interviewer, not the actual discovery of the double helix? Watson, no, because the double helix was going to be found in the next year or two. It was just waiting to be found, and I was the one who finally found it because I was the most obsessed about it. Interviewer, why did you choose to write a book focusing more on the people involved rather than the science of the double helix? Watson, I wanted to see if I could write a good book. It was ahead of its time, you could say, in terms of style. I wasn't thinking of myself as a scientist, you know. My heroes were never scientists. They were Graham Greene and Christopher Isherwood, you know, good writers. Watson and Crick's discovery had earned the pair nearly instant worldwide fame and the 1962 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. But it wasn't that historic accomplishment that made Watson most proud. It was his telling of the story in his book, The Double Helix. Why would Watson feel this way? He explained his reasons in the preface to what turned out to be a best-selling book. As I hope this book will show, science seldom proceeds in the straightforward, logical manner imagined by outsiders. Instead, its steps forward, and sometimes backward, are often very human events in which personalities and cultural traditions play major roles. Watson wanted to convey, quote, the spirit of adventure, but most importantly, he felt the story should be told because, quote, there remains general ignorance about how science is done. My main goals in writing this book are the same as Watson's, to offer a good book made up of good stories, to convey the spirit of adventure and to show how science is done. And while those may be sufficient incentives for some of you to open it, my rationale for writing the story of life goes much deeper. Why stories? Homo narrans. Rudyard Kipling once said, if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. The author of The Jungle Book and the youngest writer to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, 1907, certainly knew a lot about telling memorable stories. But little did he know that in the ensuing century, a new branch of psychology would emerge that has amply confirmed Kipling's instinct about the powers of stories. One of the central tenets of narrative theory is that human thought is fundamentally structured around stories. People record and recall life experiences as well as others' experiences in the form of stories. Just think for a minute about the role of stories in daily life. We live in a world of stories, from children's fairy tales to Hollywood blockbusters and all forms of media, books, television, radio, film, podcasts. Stories are the currency of everyday life. This has been true since or before the dawn of civilization. In oral cultures, for example, some reliable means was needed to transmit lore and information faithfully from generation to generation. All oral cultures that have been studied used and still use storytelling. Stories typically embed content into vivid imagery and characters that inspire our imagination and arouse our emotions. No doubt, our ancestors discovered that knowledge embedded in story form was more memorable than in any other. It has been claimed, and reasonably so, that the story is one of the most important human inventions. Indeed, we are such storytelling and story-seeking creatures that numerous experts have dubbed our species Homo narrans, the storytelling person. One important thrust of modern research has been to understand why and how narrative plays such a crucial role in human thought. There are two universal aspects of story structure that combine to give it power. No matter who the storyteller, narratives are usually structured in ways that connect cause and effect. X happened, so Y happened. And stories are always composed of a sequence of events that are connected over time. First X happened, then Y, then Z. People thus use stories to understand cause and effect and to connect series of events. Because narratives are constructed of causal links in some temporal order between events, stories carry the powers of both instruction and persuasion. People learn from stories because stories present a coherent argument in favor of some conclusion. The fundamental, long-standing place of story in human culture has prompted scores of educators and psychologists to study the role of story in education and learning. They have found that narratives offer many advantages over formal explanatory text such as that found in textbooks. These benefits include increased recall, greater comprehension, and shorter reading times. For example, it is claimed that people remember information when it is woven into a narrative up to 20 times more than facts alone. With respect to science content, narratives offer very specific advantages over other kinds of text. For instance, they are especially effective at conveying the scientific process. Jerome Bruner, one of the leading figures of narrative theory, noted, "The process of science is narrative. It consists of spinning hypotheses about nature, testing them, correcting the hypotheses, and getting one's head straight. The history of science can be dramatically recounted as a set of almost heroic narratives and problem solving." Bruner advocated more than 20 years ago that, quote, "our instruction in science from the start to the finish should be mindful of the lively processes of science making rather than account of only of, quote, finished science as represented in the textbook. Even though the advantages of narrative are undisputed, as you well know, textbooks are much more of a fixture in science classes than are narrative stories. It is no wonder that legendary songwriter Paul Simon sang, 'When I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all.'" And I quote that as a textbook author myself. This state of affairs is more than a missed opportunity, it is a shame. Without narrative to illuminate the making of science, there is little context as to what mystery or questions inspired an investigation or how a mystery was solved. And we get the wrong impression, or perhaps no impression at all, about who scientists are and what they do. Every biology student learns that Africa is the cradle of humanity, but there was so much more to the quest to solve one of the greatest mysteries of life than finding some old bones. Mary Leakey's story involves all sorts of emotions: love, ambition, obsession, desire, conflict, frustration, disappointment, and ultimately the thrill of discovery. It is these feelings and other human qualities such as courage, persistence, sacrifice, and resilience that make for both good science and, if told well, a good and memorable story. Which brings me to the rest of the stories in this book. Why these stories? Homo biologus. Good stories make for better and more memorable learning. But what makes a good story? Or more to the point, what makes a good science story? One that is worth precious time in the classroom or at home. Adam Gopnik, a brilliant writer for The New Yorker, and interestingly, not a scientist himself, has made the most persuasive case I know about the essentials for good science stories. He argues that both good science stories and good scientific theories are startling. They astonish us with their claims. For example, he cites this story from physics. Locked inside the nucleus of each little invisible atom is a force so vast it can destroy an entire city. Of course, biology has equally astonishing tales to tell. Inside the nucleus of every cell are invisible molecules, the positions of atoms within which determines the characteristics of every living thing on Earth. Indeed, some claims are so astonishing they are initially disbelieved by scientists and may remain disbelieved by non-scientists for decades or centuries. Gopnik notes that good science stories startle us with their strangeness, but they intrigue us by their originality and end up rewarding us with the truth after an effort. But to be startling, to be astonishing, to be worth the effort, stories also have to address something fundamentally important. They have to answer a great question about nature. Great questions stem from great mysteries. In all of the phenomena on our planet and in the universe, life presents many mysteries that have inspired great questions, such as, are species divinely created or the product of natural laws? Where did humans come from? How does like produce like? How does a single-celled egg become an adult? Why is the world green? What makes us sick? How can we prevent or cure a disease? How do our brains work? These are some of the big questions tackled in the stories in this book. Professionals will recognize their answers as the foundations of modern evolutionary biology, genetics, microbiology, immunology, neuroscience, ecology, and so forth. But humans have contemplated such matters since long before these fields existed, indeed for millennia. All cultures have origin stories, and our hunter-gatherer ancestors had to be very observant about animals and plants, or we would not be here. The ancients grasped the basics of variation and reproduction as they transformed wild plants into food crops and wild animals into livestock and companions. Similarly, untold numbers of, quote, traditional medicines were discovered long before the birth of the pharmaceutical industry, and vaccination was discovered and widely applied with no knowledge of the existence of viruses or the inner workings of the immune system. Indeed, one could make a pretty good case for another name for our species, Homo biologus. What modern biology offers are new kinds of answers to some of the oldest and greatest questions humans have ever posed about life. These answers come in the form of startling discoveries and important truths about the workings of life and our place in nature. My aim in this book is to present the stories of many of the seminal discoveries in biology, hence the title, The Story of Life. The general plan of the book is to present classic stories along with more recent discoveries that offer new insights or apply new knowledge to medicine or managing nature. I am keenly aware that every biology course entails a great deal of work, and more reading may be an unwelcome addition to that effort. I hope that burden will be lessened, however, as you discover much to be admired in these people and in their accomplishments. Most of these scientists paid mightily for their discoveries by enduring physical hardships or having their breakthroughs doubted or denied. Many bravely undertook great journeys or risky experiments. Given such great characters and high-stakes drama, I even dare hope that you might enjoy reading these stories. Or looking at it another way, as former Beatle George Harrison did in the preface to one of his writings, I have suffered for this book. Now it's your turn. Sean B. Carroll, Chevy Chase, Maryland. All right, I really do. I love that preface, man, and I kind of agree with the power of story and the need to make storytelling more central in science. It's something I've been talking to and trying to communicate more, even with my own mentor about. To be honest, I'm really convinced that a lot of what I'm trying to do in this community and with my career is telling a story. And I think that as meaningful as my work is and as much as I hope to accomplish professionally, I think living out that story in a way that it's actually shared with people and people can kind of get with it and figure out where they belong in that journey and then, see it playing out is definitely what excites me the most. So much to the point that I largely see what I have to do professionally as sort of, playing out that story. I know for those of you that are probably familiar with, our love of pro wrestling, it's the same thing, right? Like that's what makes wrestling so great for those of, or it's one of the things that makes wrestling so great for those of us that are wrestling fans is that wrestling is this amazing story where the characters and the story evolves and it changes right in front of you and it never ends. It really never ends. Literally the story of a wrestler to a wrestling fan never ends. And I'm thinking about how deeply I mean never ends, right? Because each time I've said never ends to you, I've taken it to another level in my head. Like you could say the story never ends because we just follow that character and that wrestler to their next rivalry, their next feud, their next quest for their next championship. But even if they leave a company or they leave a promotion, we still follow them and we're still watching their story play out until they retire. But even when they retire, their story is not over because post their retirement, we watch how they interact with and secure their legacy, how their legacy holds up over time to the progression of wrestling and the other stories that are told. And then ultimately, even when all wrestlers return to the great locker room in the sky, and the show really is over, of course, even then they're still with us, and they've sort of put a brick with their name on it. That's part of the edifice of the whole thing that just keeps going, that no real person or organization has any control over. It's fucking pro wrestling, just is what it is. And science is very much that way. And it's kind of a struggle at times, because there's a lot of things where like today, you don't know how much work you should be doing on stream. You're trying to get the community more on board with hanging out, working together, getting more into the professional side of things, but you've got to balance that out with keeping things fun and entertaining, and there's no roadmap on how to do this, and there's certainly no reward structure set up in my profession for this type of thing. I mean, in reality, the best career advice most people would give me is stop doing this and write papers. That's the guaranteed path to what I'm trying to achieve in life, but we think we're doing something bigger But I'm very well aware that I'm essentially preparing for a future that I have no idea what it actually looks like, and preparing for a career that nobody has. But the confidence, the desire to keep going comes from an awareness of the story, the fact that we're telling a story, and it's an incredible story that I've had the fortune of living, and that the science just isn't enough. It's not enough to just teach. It's not enough to just do the research. It's just not enough. That's never been enough to give us the human transformation we really need. So I'm with it. I'm gonna take a second to catch up on the chat real quick. Where at? I thought I sent none. Maybe a gather invite, but I can send that out. It's yeah, but yeah. I think I may have missed a question here. Oh yeah, the password list is you have to DM me and I'll email it to you. But yeah, I thought I emailed. Yeah, okay, none did get it. Oh, AR got you sorted out. Awesome, awesome. Cool. Yeah, email me and Gather, gang, is the best way. Sorry, DM me and Gather. Send me your email address, and I'll send you the Gather links and passwords. All right, cool. I'm going to take a sip of water. Oh, also, before I jump into chapter 1, I also really like the idea of Martin Luther King kind of talked about this. He talked about the need to dramatize things because I think he recognized the same thing, the power of narrative. And he realized that, you know, people had to become invested in the struggle for equality and civil rights. And I think that is something I'm constantly trying to speak to in this community, is that when people have these anti-scientific attitudes, or they misrepresent science, or they dismiss science, I know for many people it just sounds like they're dismissing a worldview that they don't like, or they're just dismissing some opinion they don't like. Like, you know, I say, oh, I really love that yellow Ferrari, and you're like, yo, Ferrari should never ever be anything other than Ferrari red, and like we just have a fucking difference of opinion about a fucking aesthetic. It's like, no, dog, you don't understand what people go through to make the scientific discoveries they make. Like, I think all my work is hard won. You know, like, I can't even begin to explain the sacrifices I've had to make to do the work, or the sacrifices I have to continue to make to continue to do the work I do. But it's really important that we get some of these stories where you can really humanize and think about what people actually do. Like, I remember one time I was in Utah, Snowbird, Utah. It was actually where I met a lot of the people that recruited me to the grad program I was in. And I was working out there with these dinosaur scientists, basically. And we went to a natural history museum in Utah, a real famous one, and they let us kind of go back, like kind of behind the scenes, right, into like the private rooms where the people are like preparing the fossils and stuff like that. And I remember they let me touch a dinosaur fossil. I was very moved by that. I was like, it really felt like a real big moment in my life to make a physical connection like that with an actual, dinosaur fossil, like touching something that ancient and prehistoric. But you're like in this whole secure ass room, and these people are all masked up, and they're like pulling these fossils out of the casings, and they're going through all this meticulous work to prepare them without damaging them, and of course normally people can't touch them just because even something like the oil on skin from people over handling them would like degrade them and shit. And you realize that people have to take these months-long excursions away from homes, and they have to fly to like these remote parts of crazy remote mountains in the world that are basically fucking uninhabited, and they got a helicopter up there every fucking day from these crazy ass base camps, right? And then they gotta like demolition out the side of a mountain, but fucking carefully so that you don't fuck up any of the fucking Jurassic Park bones that are inside of it. Right, like y'all, it's like a multi-million-dollar fucking corporate operation. It's the same shit. It's like the same amount of work that goes into extracting fucking like diamonds and shit. It's just a crazy, laborious process that requires the coordination of millions of tax dollars and different governments from around the world, and specialists from all these different, right? And people just turn their nose up at it, like these people then just do all this fucking work. And it's like, yo, that type of ignorance is so dehumanizing. And I do think it's important that we share those stories so people can start to understand what scientists are really willing to put on the line to be scientists. And I love the quote from the George Harrison writing, "I have suffered for this book, now it's your turn." That's how I feel about my knowledge of evolution. That's how I feel about what it took to become an evolutionary biologist, especially when I'm talking to a creationist. Like, I've had to suffer long and hard to come by my opportunities and understanding of the world. It is motherfucking your turn. Like, straight up, like, I straight up relate to that. I have suffered for this book. Now it's your turn. I could, come on, y'all. I told y'all, I spent damn near 10 years in grad school. That was just the second time when I got my PhD, y'all. I spent time in for my master's too. I have suffered for this dissertation. Now it's your turn. 100%. 100%. I can relate to that. All right, let me hit this shit and we'll get into chapter 1. All right, let's get it, y'all. All right, chapter 1 is called The Process of Science. The scientific process has proved to be the most powerful means humans have devised for learning about nature. One great strength of this process is that it is open to new information. New ideas are born continuously, and new evidence is constantly gathered and weighed against existing explanations. Sometimes long established ideas are completely overturned. It is a process that, when followed, has the power to enable us to understand the often complex relationships between cause and effect in nature or in the human body. The first story in this section is all of this. A story about overturning established thinking with a revolutionary idea about the cause of a human disease. It is a shining example of the scientific process in action, but it is equally important to appreciate that when the scientific method is not followed or when evidence is swept aside, as in our second story, the consequences can be far-reaching, even tragic. All right. The process science is the part one, title part one. All right. The title of chapter one is Guts and Glory. And the quote here is Fortune favors the bold, which is a Latin proverb. October 3rd, 2005 was a cool, cloudy Monday afternoon in Perth, Australia. Robin Warren and Barry Marshall, two longtime colleagues, were enjoying cold beers at their favorite pub on the Swan River. Warren's fish and chips had just arrived when his cell phone rang. A man named Hans Jornvoll was calling from Sweden with some shocking news. Warren was to receive the Nobel Prize for Medicine. At first, Warren did not believe it was true, that the Nobel Committee was calling him. Once it sank in that the man on the other end was legitimate, Jornvoll explained to Warren that he had a big problem. The announcement was supposed to be made to the world in just half an hour, but he had been unable to reach Barry Marshall, with whom Warren was to share the prize. Jornvoll said he had called Marshall's home and his office, but could not find him. Warren laughed and said, "Oh, he is here with me at the pub. We are having a beer together." He passed his phone to Marshall. At first glance, the two men were unlikely Nobel laureates. Warren was the pathologist and Marshall a gastroenterologist. They were not the kind of genetic pioneers that had garnered many of the recent prizes. Moreover, they worked in Perth, one of the most remote, albeit beautiful cities in the world, far from the scientific and academic hubs of North America and Europe. But their discovery had changed the lives of millions of people and rewritten medical textbooks. Something unusual. The adventure began in 1979 on Robin Warren's 42nd birthday, not with a slice of cake, but with a slice of someone's stomach. Warren was a consulting pathologist at the Royal Perth Hospital. One of his tasks was to examine biopsies from patients with various complaints. That day, he was examining a biopsy from a patient with gastritis, an inflammation of the stomach. In his microscope, he noticed a thin blue line on the surface of the stomach lining. Under higher magnification, he thought he could see many small bacteria sticking to cells lining the stomach. If true, his observation was very odd because Warren had been taught, and indeed it was medical dogma, that bacteria could not live in the normal stomach because of its acidity. Excited, Warren showed the specimen to a colleague, but he said he could not pick out the bacteria. To assist his work in pathology, Warren had been experimenting with stains that helped to highlight features in tissue samples viewed under a microscope. He found that tiny bacteria were especially difficult to see against the background of human tissues, but he had discovered one silver stain that marked certain bacteria well. He had no idea what sort of bacteria might be in his stomach biopsy, but he gave the stain a try. It worked beautifully, revealing scores of small, curved, grayish bacteria against the yellow-brown background of stomach tissue. Warren thought the bacteria looked like those of a group named Campylobacter, and said so in his formal pathology report. He added, they appear to be actively growing and not a contaminant. I am not sure of the significance of these unusual findings, but further investigation of the patient's eating habits, gastrointestinal function, and microbiology may be worthwhile. His pathology colleagues believe that Warren had found bacteria, but it was unclear what the presence of the microbes meant. Were they just a one-time coincidence, or could they play a role in stomach disease? If the bacteria were significant, why had no one else seen or reported them? One pathologist told them, if you really believe they are important, see if you can find more cases. Warren went looking for bacteria and biopsies taken from other gastritis patients and found them often, but their presence could either be the primary cause of the inflammation or the result from a secondary infection of wounded tissue. To try to distinguish between these possibilities, he needed to examine a negative control, to look at healthy stomachs to see if bacteria were present. But that posed a problem. Surgeons sought out diseased areas for biopsy, not normal-looking tissue. Eventually, Warren was able to review some normal-appearing biopsies and to determine that the bacteria were absent. This correlation was consistent with the possibility that the bacteria were causing disease, but Warren was still not able to convince others. Figure 1.1, we have Robin Warren's first case of bacteria in a stomach biopsy. A staining stomach tissue from a patient with gastritis reveals many curved bacteria on the stomach lining. So there's just an illustration here. And yeah, it looks just like a blotchy map or something, but it's a stomach lining with bacteria stained on it. You can see little curvy bacteria stains on the flesh. This is what scientific revolutions look like, y'all. They look like fucking abstractionist paintings where a 3-year-old took a gray paintbrush and just splotted all over the place, and said, "Look, mommy, I'm done." And then you had to put it on your refrigerator like you was proud of that nasty shit. And yeah, that's what fucking scientific. That's how scientific revolutionaries are started. All right. A collaborator appears. He then met Barry Marshall, a young physician who was being trained in internal medicine at Royal Perth Hospital. Part of the training program involved rotations through different specialities. Marshall aimed to become a rheumatologist, but began his stint in the gastroenterology division in July 1981. Marshall was hoping to do some research while he was there, and he was referred to Warren, who was looking for a clinician to help him obtain some fresh biopsies to look for microbes. Marshall visited Warren in his basement office, where Warren proceeded to show Marshall slide after slide of the strange curved bacteria he had found in the inflamed stomach linings of gastritis patients. Marshall was intrigued because he also, quote, knew that the stomach was supposed to be sterile. He thought that identifying this unusual bacterium would make a good project and agreed to work with Warren. Marshall reviewed the case histories of the patients in whom Warren found bacteria. Their ailments were not limited to gastritis, but also included ulcers, which are sores or breaks in the lining of the stomach or duodenum, the upper part of the small intestine. Marshall knew from clinical experience that ulcers were very serious, usually lifelong condition that could cause debilitating pain. Ulcers were also associated with a much higher risk of stomach cancer. At the time, milder cases were treated with antacids and drugs that inhibited the production of stomach acid, but these treatments merely mitigated symptoms. They were not cures. More severe cases could prompt surgical removal of the lower third of the stomach. In order to identify the bacterium, Marshall decided to try to culture it from fresh biopsies. As soon as the biopsies were removed, Marshall put them in a salt solution and delivered them to the hospital's microbiology department. The presence of the bacteria was confirmed by staining, and then a wash of the specimen was applied to bacteriological plates, placed in an incubator, and checked for bacterial growth 48 hours later. Despite the evidence of bacteria in each biopsy, every attempt to culture them failed, sample after sample, week after week, for 6 months. Marshall's stint in the gastroenterology rotation was ending, and he had to move on to a rotation in hermatology. His project might have been a complete bust had he and Warren not also tried another way of testing the bacteria's significance. They figured that if the bacteria were causing disease, then treatment with antibiotics might bring relief. They gave the antibiotic tetracycline to one elderly patient who had severe abdominal pain and whose biopsy revealed the presence of the curved bacteria. After 2 weeks, the man's pain and chronic gastric symptoms had disappeared. The patient was ecstatic, but Warren and Marshall's peers were not swayed. This was just a single case, and Warren and Marshall still cannot say whether the bacteria triggered the man's condition or were a secondary problem. Their colleagues urged the pair to undertake a large-scale, carefully controlled study to pin down the role of bacteria in disease. Proving postulates. The process for proving a particular microbe causes a specific disease has long been established in medical science. In the second half of the 19th century, Louis Pasteur in France and Robert Koch in Germany were leading proponents of the so-called germ theory of disease that asserted that certain diseases were caused by microorganisms. Koch proposed a series of criteria or postulates that needed to be fulfilled to prove a causal link between a microbe and disease, including these. 1. The infected tissue must show the presence of the microorganisms not found in healthy tissue. 2. The microorganism should be isolated and grown outside of the body. 3, the microorganism should produce the disease when inoculated into a susceptible animal. And 4, the microorganism should be found in the area of induced disease. Marshall, even though he had moved on to daily duties in the hematology ward, launched a 100-patient gastroenterology and microbiology study with several collaborators. The plan was to enroll patients undergoing stomach examinations and see whether the bacteria were present in sick patients and absent from normal stomachs. In the early morning, before work, and during his morning break, he would approach endoscopy patients and recruit them to take part in the study. Their biopsies were then kept on ice until Marshall was able to deliver them to the laboratory for microbiological examination and attempts to culture them. A few months into the study, Marshall caught a very lucky break. Marshall caught a very lucky break. On the Thursday before Easter 1982, a biopsy was taken from a man with an ulcer in his duodenum. Normally, the procedure was to culture the sample for 48 hours, after which the bacteriological plates were discarded. More than 30 cultures had turned up nothing, but on that Easter weekend, the laboratory was shorthanded, and the man's culture plates were not examined for 5 days until the following Tuesday. This time, the technician saw small, transparent colonies of an unfamiliar bacterium. The chief of microbiology called Marshall down to the lab to show him the exciting discovery growing on the plate. Once they knew that the bacterium was slow growing, they were quickly able to isolate it from another 11 patients. Electron microscopy revealed a spiral-like organism with multiple tail-like flagella, similar to Campylobacter. Figure 1-2, Helicobacter pylori. I hate pronouncing Latin names. The bacterium is about 0.5 micromoles, I think that is, in diameter and 2.5 long, with 5 flagella that have bulbous tips. So here's a picture of the bacteria. The ability to culture and recognize the organism was a key advance, but the main purpose of the 100-patient study was to see how the presence of the bacteria correlated with disease. The study concluded in May of 1982 when Marshall was to relocate to a new posting at a hospital in Port Hedland, a mining town 1,200 miles from Perth.
Plausible.
Just before he left, Marshall spent a Saturday morning photocopying the clinical records of the 100 patients to take with him to his new assignment. Once in Port Hedland, he spent his evenings poring over laboratory results and the patient's diagnoses, looking for any associations. He found that 65% of the patients had the bacteria, and nearly all of those had some evidence of gastritis. Moreover, all 13 patients with duodenal ulcer had the bacteria. And just as importantly, people without the bacteria did not have ulcers, except for a few that were on painkillers known to cause stomach damage. Statistical tests revealed that the relationship between bacteria and ulcers was very unlikely to be a random coincidence. It was time to share the results. Oh, they actually have... Wow, they actually have the chart here. It shows the results of that study. Basically shows how many people were in each condition, whether that being a gastric ulcer, a duodenal ulcer, all ulcers, an esophagus abnormal, gastritis, duodenitis, bile and stomach, or normal. How many of them had the bacteria, and then what the p-values were. And yeah, it's really clear that all the people with ulcers have it. Most of the people, 13 out of 13 with duodenal, 18 of 22 with the gastric, and 27 out of 31 total. And then you don't have any significant p-values at all for the other conditions. Really clean result. All right, in February 1983, Marshall and Warren submitted an abstract of their findings to the Gastroenterological Society of Australia, which was holding its annual meeting in Perth. The abstract was rejected. The cover letter stated that the society was able to accept 56 of the 67 abstracts submitted. Marshall and Warren's report of the association between bacteria and stomach disease was rated near bottom of the heap. Warren and Marshall had become accustomed to skepticism. The gastroenterology community had long believed that ulcers were a matter of lifestyle, including stress, diet, alcohol, and smoking, not due to an infection. The conventional thinking was that the appropriate treatment was to reduce stomach acid, and thanks to the prevalence of ulcers, those drugs were billion-dollar blockbusters. Marshall realized that gastroenterologists were not going to accept a revolutionary discovery based on 13 patients from Western Australia. He and Warren were going to have to do more to convince the medical community. The best way to do that was to publish their findings in prominent peer-reviewed journals and to have others confirm them. They reported their initial findings about the discovery and description of the bacteria in 2 papers in The Lancet, one of the world's oldest and most prestigious medical journals. In his report, Marshall speculated if these bacteria are truly associated with gastritis, they may have a part to play in other poorly understood gastritis-associated diseases, i.e. peptic ulcer and gastric cancer. The publications prompted other investigators around the world to search for the bacteria in their patients. Here we see the rejection letter. I love this. Even Nobel Prize winning discoveries may be rejected at first. There's a letter to Barry Marshall explaining that his abstract reporting the association of bacteria and stomach disease was not among the 56 selected for the 1983 Gastroenterological Society of Australia. It says, Dear Dr. Marshall, I regret that your research paper was not accepted for presentation on the program of the annual scientific meeting of the Gastroenterological Society of Australia to be held in Perth in May 1983. The number of abstracts we received continues to increase, and for this meeting, 67 were submitted, and we were able to accept 56. There were a large number of high-quality abstracts, which made it extremely difficult to choose those which should be accepted for presentation. And as you know, this is now done by a national abstract selection committee, which reviews the abstracts without knowledge of the authors concerned. The National Program Committee would like to thank you for submitting your work and would hope that this might be resubmitted in the future, perhaps following critical review from your colleagues. My kindest regards. Yours sincerely, for Terry D. Bolin, Honorary Secretary. Boom. All right, over here is the rejection letter. It's just a copy of the letter. All right. All right, here we go. At this stage, however, Marshall and Warren had support for just 2 of Koch's 4 postulates: the association of the bacteria with the disease and their ability to culture it. The remaining challenges were to show that the bacteria could induce disease in a laboratory animal, and that the eradication of the bacteria eliminated disease. By 1984, the latter was going pretty well. Marshall was very excited to discover that the bacteria were extremely sensitive to bismuth, the main ingredient in Pepto-Bismol, and long known to have antibacterial properties. He experimented with the combination of bismuth and the antibiotic metronidazole. Wait, I'm not saying metronidazole. Yeah, boom, love it. And was able to cure 4 out of 4 people. Oh, nice. Establishing the disease in an animal, however, was difficult. Marshall feared it perhaps impossible. He had tried pigs because their large body size would allow Marshall to insert an endoscope into their stomachs, but inoculation of the pigs with bacteria was a complete failure. No disease formed and no bacteria were detectable in their stomachs. Bacteria are often restricted in the species and tissues they can infect. If Marshall was going to convince the world that Helicobacter caused disease, he needed to find the right animal, which species provided the best odds of getting infected. Marshall realized the best candidate stared back at him in the mirror every morning. When all else fails. Marshall had been mulling testing the bacteria on himself for a while. His first concern, of course, was making himself sick with perhaps a chronic condition. But with his antibiotic regimen apparently working, he thought it might be reasonably safe for him to try. The greater worry was scientific. He knew that if nothing happened in his experiment, if the bacteria did not colonize his stomach, if gastritis did not develop, then his hypothesis could be wrong, or at the very least, the disease is more complicated than a bacterial infection. He discussed the idea of swallowing the bacteria with a couple of his colleagues who seemed neutral about the idea. One microbiologist laughed and declined to, quote, take the bug himself. Clinical experiments on humans are regulated by institutional committees, but Marshall did not need to apply for any formal approval, having decided that if he were turned down, he would take the bacteria anyway and probably lose his job. He adopted a don't ask, don't tell strategy. He showed up one morning at the endoscopy clinic before it opened and asked a friend to put an endoscope into his stomach and take a biopsy. This would be Marshall's baseline sample before drinking the bacteria. It showed a normal, healthy stomach lining. That same day, Marshall biopsied a middle-aged man with gastritis. Laboratory tests revealed Helicobacter pylori that was sensitive to Marshall's antibiotic regimen. Marshall treated the patient for 2 weeks and confirmed that the infection was gone. With the disease-causing germ in hand that he knew could be eradicated with antibiotics, Marshall decided the crucial test was now or never. On the morning of his experiment, he skipped his breakfast and took a drug to reduce his stomach acid, figuring that might improve the ability of the bacterium to colonize his stomach. After fasting until 11 a.m., he was handed by a technician a beaker with about 2 teaspoons, 10 milliliters of broth in it, into which he had scraped a plate full of Helicobacter, about 1 billion bacteria. Oh my goodness. Marshall chugged the cloudy brown liquid in one gulp, and after waiting a couple of more hours, ate normally and went on with his workday. That evening, he told his wife, Adrienne, that he had started the experiment. Marshall did not notice any symptoms for a few days, but then he woke up several mornings in a row, nauseated and vomited. His wife noticed his breath was, quote, putrid, a fact his colleagues at work were too polite to tell him. After 10 days, Marshall again asked a colleague to take a biopsy. To his, quote, joy, the bacteria were present in his inflamed stomach lining. The experiment had worked. Koch postulates had been met. Helicobacter pylori was a pathogen. Whew, from heretics to heroes. Word of Marshall's experiment leaked out before he could document his experience. An American newspaper reporter woke Warren early one morning with questions about their work. When the reporter asked how Warren knew the bacteria caused disease, Warren told him about Marshall infecting himself. The story's headline was, "Guinea Pig Doctor Discovers New Cure for Ulcers, ... and the cause." Marshall wrote up his self-experiment for formal publication, referring to himself as a, quote, volunteer, before disclosing that he was the subject described in the study. By this time in 1985, physicians in other parts of the world had begun confirming the presence of Helicobacter in their patients' stomachs. The link was growing stronger. The medical community required still one more chunk of evidence to change its treatment of ulcers from focusing on stomach acids to treating them as an infection. The evidence came in the form of multiple clinical trials that tested the ability of various antibiotics to eradicate the bacteria from patients and to prevent the relapse of ulcers. Trials carried out in Amsterdam, Vienna, Houston, and elsewhere all reported success in eradicating Helicobacter pylori in up to 90% of patients and providing a lasting cure. Antibiotics thus became and remain the mainstay of ulcer treatment today, and Marshall and Warren went from heretics to medical heroes. And on that joyous afternoon, following their stunning call from Sweden, the two pioneers toasted their remarkable journey, not with beer or bacteria, but champagne. And here's them celebrating their Nobel Prize. All right. Now, gang, we've got some end of chapter questions. We want to map the steps involved in Warren and Marshall's discovery of the role of H. pylori in stomach disease and its ultimate acceptance by the medical community to the steps of the scientific process. All right, what observation triggered the first suspicion that bacteria might cause stomach disease? All right, so that was way back here in the beginning. All right, he was in the pathology. Yep, he noticed that thin blue line. All right, he was examining a biopsy from a patient with gastritis. It was his 42nd birthday, and he celebrated not with the slice of cake, but with the slice of someone's stomach. So we had examined biopsies from patients with various complaints, and one of them, he noticed a thin blue line on the surface of the stomach lining, and under higher magnification, he thought he could see many small bacteria sticking to cells lining the stomach. What logical questions did this observation prompt? He had to ask questions about, like, was it just correlated? Was it the size? Was it really bacteria? It's true his observation was odd because he had been taught, indeed it was medical dogma, that bacteria could not live in the normal stomach because of the acidity. So he had to deal with the whole correlation and cause thing. Warren and Marshall proposed the hypothesis bacteria caused stomach disease. What was an alternative hypothesis that could explain their initial observation? That it was a secondary infection, that first you get the disease as a result of whatever the actual cause is, and then you have a secondary vulnerability to the bacteria. According to Koch's well-established postulates that the bacteria cause disease, then what lines of evidence should bear that out? It should be associated with the disease. It should be in the local area. You should be able to culture it outside of the area, and then treating it should remove the symptoms, right? Those are 4 postulates. Here we go. The infected tissue must show the presence of the microorganism not found in healthy tissue. The microorganism should be isolated and grown outside the body. The microorganism should produce the disease when inoculated into a susceptible animal. And the microorganism should be found in the area of the induced disease. That's like the locality. How did Marshall directly test whether bacteria could cause gastritis? He dosed himself. What predictions did the bacterial theory of stomach disease make about treatment? Oh, that he should be able to treat it with this antibiotic. At first, I was going to say the other. I was almost going to respond to the other theories, but those weren't the bacterial theories. Those were the lifestyle theories. Why was the bacterial cause of stomach ulcers ultimately accepted? Because he had the motherfucking goods, baby. Also because all 4 of those criteria, all 4 of the postulates, Koch's postulates were met, and their work was replicated. And a large part of that was them publishing in more prestigious journals where they actually got challenged like they needed to. That was cool. All right, so I just wanted to read quickly through those end of chapter questions because my students will have to, and that might also be a good place to think through some questions that I might post for them in their discussions. But that is chapter 1. Gut instinct, I think, non-believer. Y'all should look into the evolutionary relationship between guts and brains. Basically, a big part of the idea is that cooking our food reduced selection pressure on our guts for digesting like all the raw shit, and that is one of the things that allowed us to focus more of our caloric intake on developing bigger brains. All right, I'm gonna take a quick hydration and meditation break. Y'all already know what I'm talking about. Little sip, little rip. In the language of my main man, look at the trees.
Look at the trees.
Also, y'all gotta make sure y'all checking out Look at the Trees, man. That channel is fire. He's got new rips and sips out. We'll probably watch a new rip and sip in the after party. I think we've already watched it today, actually. Come to think of it, I think we watched it earlier. After this, I'm gonna make myself some dinner. I want to make myself some cheeseburgers. Need some new lighters. Yeah, Trees' content is really great, y'all. I'm gonna have to add him to the channels in the description. Also, it's some new Cameron Bennett out. It's some new KB Fit 2.0 out. Make sure y'all check out some Cameron. Appreciate you, none. All right, y'all. Let's go ahead and jump into chapter 2. All right. Now, actually, before I do that, let me just say this. This chapter reminded me of a paper I read. Y'all should check it out. You can find it pretty easily if you Google Scholar LSDNA. It's basically a paper about the discovery, how like the person who discovered, I think the STRs, maybe the short tandem repeats, was like influenced by LSD and sort of the role of self-experimentation in the discovery of the effects of LSD. It was a really, really great paper, but we've sort of gotten away from this idea of self-experimentation, right? But that paper had a big influence on me, and I actually shared it in a reading group with some of my colleagues talking about social and cultural evolution, and it kind of changed the direction of like what I was doing with the channel and my career a little bit, because I basically decided like that's what we're doing is like I basically had this like feeling like we've gotten too far away from self-experimentation, and we need to get back to, you know, seeing ourselves as participants or subjects in an experiment, and like seeing experimentation on ourselves, right? Like, and I started to see a lot of what I'm doing as like experimenting with the career, different ways of communicating about science, different ways of engaging, different ways of doing outreach, and being okay with the fact that we don't really know what all the results are gonna be. We're just dosing ourselves with counter apologetics and all of this shit. But we're kind of pioneering, we're kind of just prospecting and seeing what's fruitful. So it's a fireplace sound effect to go with the fireplace. Yeah, like a fireside chat. Otherwise, when I'm reading, I'm like sitting in a room and I just hear the machines, and it's really annoying. Just sitting in a room listening to fucking computer fans. All right, chapter 2. Oh, all right, so here's what I wanted to say about chapter 2. I haven't read this book, obviously. This is my first time going through it with y'all. But the title of chapter 2 is First Do No Harm. And it has a modern Hippocratic oath. It says, I will respect the hard-won scientific gains of those physicians in whose steps I walk. So that's a modern Hippocratic oath. I will respect the hard-won scientific gains of those physicians in whose steps I walk. I don't obviously we don't take oaths as PhDs or scientists, but I remember taking a personal oath inspired by the Hippocratic Oath of doing no harm, which basically just says, as a PhD, as an educator, I have an obligation to do no harm through my education. And primarily, that means, knowingly miseducating people or misrepresenting things from an educational perspective. I really think that has to be seen as like a serious breach of course, personal ethics, of course, professional ethics, but I think a violation of the public trust. Ultimately, these institutions, these academic institutions, the scientific societies, all that shit, the public really plays a big role in funding these institutions and the scientists, and they really do trust us with, a certain due diligence with how we represent our expertise. And I do think that obligates us to, be forthright in certain ways. And it to me, it reminded me of a Hippocratic Oath. And I remember that being something I take very, very seriously. It's why y'all see me be so forthright in this community. It's why I won't pull no punches with somebody's being anti-scientific. It's like I can't. It's like if somebody goes there, they start being anti-scientific, they start being off base. It's like we gotta call that out because we just have to. So I'm happy to hear that I'm not alone in thinking that all types of academics need to take this type of responsibility that seriously. It shouldn't just be something limited to medical doctors. I think anybody in education should feel the serious type of public trust, similar to anybody who's like a politician or a civil servant should feel it. All right. In February 1998, another report in the medical journal The Lancet sparked a revolution, more like a revolt of a different kind than Warren and Marshall's. The paper described 12 young patients with gastrointestinal disorders who also exhibited developmental problems characteristic of regressive autism. The term described children who first develop normally, then exhibit losses in acquired language and social skills. This was in contrast to classical autism, in which acquisition of such skills never occurs or is severely delayed. Because of the apparent delayed onset of the symptoms, parents and physicians suspected that there was some kind of environmental trigger for the condition. A team of 13 authors associated with the Royal Free Hospital and School of Medicine in London reported that parents or physicians of 8 of the 12 children linked the onset of symptoms to vaccination with the measles, mumps, and rubella MMR vaccine. In the 8 children, behavioral symptoms were reported to occur an average of 6.3 days after vaccination, range of 1 to 14 days. 5 children were also reported to have adverse reactions to the vaccine, rash, fever, delirium, and in 3 cases, convulsions. The authors stated that they had not proved the link between MMR vaccination and the gastrointestinal behavioral syndrome. They noted if there is a causal link between measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine and this syndrome, a rising incidence might be anticipated after the introduction of this vaccine. And indeed, the rate of autism appeared to be rising. The authors urged further investigations are needed to examine this syndrome and its possible relation to this vaccine. At the time, UK government policy was for every child to receive the first of 2 MMR shots between the ages of 13 and 15 months. The possibility that this policy could actually be causing harm would be shocking. A press conference was called at the Royal Free Hospital on the day of publication. The dean of the medical school urged that the results on such a small number of children be interpreted cautiously. He was worried that the public confidence in the MMR vaccine could be damaged. Measles vaccines are among the safest and most effective vaccines ever developed, he said. However, the lead author of the study, Dr. Andrew Wakefield, thought action was necessary. One more case of this is too many. It's a moral issue for me, and I can't support the continued use of these vaccines given in combination until this issue has been resolved. The genie was out of the bottle. Firestorm. The British press ran stories with headlines such as, "Alert over child jabs." Jab is British slang for vaccine injection. And "Ban 3-in-1 jab, urge doctors." The possible link between a routine vaccine and a rising incidence of autism understandably worried parents, physicians, and policymakers around the globe. The MMR vaccine had been in use in the United States for 30 years, much longer than in the United Kingdom. In April 2000, the U.S. Congress held a hearing to get to the bottom of the matter. Representative Dan Burton of Indiana, the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, had been touched personally by the issue. "My grandson, after receiving 9 shots in one day, quit speaking, ran around banging his head against the wall, screaming and hollering and waving his hands, and became a totally different child. And we found out that he was autistic." Burton continued, "He was born healthy, then he had those shots, and our lives changed and his life changed." Several patients of autistic children then testified, expressing their conviction that the MMR vaccine had triggered their child's syndrome. Blame was placed on the drug companies that manufactured the vaccines. As one parent put it, "They manufacture products that are required for every child in this country. While seeking greater profits, they have lost sight of the medical community's original goal, to protect children from harm." Andrew Wakefield also testified. He revealed that he had now studied, but not published results for, an additional 150 children and stated that the vaccine had caused autism in all but 4. Several more scientists, some collaborators of Wakefield, supported Wakefield's hypothesis of the vaccine causing autism. That viewpoint, however, was not unanimous. Brent Taylor, also a professor at the Royal Free, disagreed. Taylor had examined 293 cases of autism and found no difference in the age of children diagnosed with autism who had received the vaccine and those who were never vaccinated. Taylor also found no association between the timing of the vaccination and the onset of symptoms. And he also found no evidence for an increase in the rate of autism after the introduction of the MMR vaccine in England. Taylor had published his findings the previous summer in The Lancet. The belief that MMR is the cause of autism is a false hope, Taylor testified. There is no evidence that immunizations are involved. Despite Taylor's testimony against the link, press coverage of the hearing spread awareness of the possible connection between the MMR vaccine and autism. Andrew Wakefield was in the center of the media spotlight, cast as David against the Goliath of the medical establishment. Wakefield appeared on the most widely watched American news show, 60 Minutes, and stated that he would not give his own children the combination MMR vaccine. He was also featured on the British Broadcasting Company's Sunday evening program Panorama in an episode entitled MMR, Every Parent's Choice. Each program presented stories of parents who witnessed the heartbreaking decline of their children. Certainly, something was to blame, and the MMR vaccinations, or vaccines in general, seemed to be logical suspects. Most medical experts who were interviewed on camera disagreed and tried to underscore the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. The medical establishment was criticized publicly and often. One editorial in The Telegraph was entitled, "Shame on Officials Who Say MMR is Safe." At a rally in Washington, D.C., Wakefield spoke. "We are in the midst of an international epidemic. Those responsible for investigating and dealing with the epidemic have failed. Among the reasons for this failure is the fact that they are faced with the prospect that they themselves may be responsible for the epidemic. I believe that public health officials know there is a problem. They are, however, willing to deny the problem and accept the loss of an unknown number of children on the basis of the success of public health policy. Mandatory vaccination, by necessity, involves sacrifice. In the face of such controversy, the decision to vaccinate or not posed a dilemma with potentially high stakes. Whom or what were parents to believe? At the same rally, Wakefield outlined the path forward. Our quest for truth through science, a science that is compassionate, uncompromising, and uncompromised. That quest would entail more studies, require more scrutiny, and uncover some very disturbing surprises. The quest for truth. Wakefield had testified that he had extended his findings of a link between vaccination, gastrointestinal disease, and autism to many more children. However, a series of independent studies by researchers in the United Kingdom, Canada, and Finland did not detect any association between the MMR vaccine and autism. Several months after the BBC's MMR program aired, a very large study of Danish children was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Comparison of autism rates between a group of 440,000 children who had received the MMR vaccine and about 97,000 who had not been vaccinated revealed no difference in the risk of autism, nor did the study find any association between the age at the time of vaccination or the time since vaccination and the diagnosis of autism. These failures to confirm a link between MMR vaccine and autism did not quell the controversy. The timing of the battery of childhood immunizations and parents noticing behavioral symptoms in their children seemed too close to be explained as mere coincidence. So if the culprit were not MMR itself, what else could it be? The next suspect was a chemical that was present in several vaccines. Thimerosal, sorry, it's on two lines. Thimerosal, a mercury-containing compound with antibacterial activity, had been used for decades as a preservative, although never in the MMR vaccine. Although the amount of thimerosal present in vaccines was very small, mercury and various forms of mercury were known to be toxic to humans and other animals. As a precautionary measure, thimerosal was removed from childhood vaccines in the United States in 2001. But this action, taken at a time of much debate about the safety of vaccines, appeared only to inspire new worry. Magazine articles and television programs sounded the alarm, often misreporting the concentration of mercury in vaccines. Politicians again joined the chorus of concern, publicly doubting the government agencies responsible for vaccine recommendations and safety. By 2004, vaccination rates in Great Britain had declined from 92% of children before the Wakefield report to about 79% afterward. That drop worried public health experts because the larger the fraction of unimmunized children, the greater the risk of infections spreading through the population. All right, Figure 2, Chapter 2.1, we have the MMR vaccination coverage in England from 1988 to 2014. The percentage of 24-month-old toddlers who received the MMR vaccine is plotted. The Wakefield study appeared in 1998. And you can see there's it's the first sort of major downhill, and you see it doesn't start to tick back up until after 2005. It's just a little chart there. Showing what I guess you would say is indeed a decline in the MMR vaccination rates following, I guess what I'll refer to as the Wakefield incident. Was thimerosal, and particularly the cumulative dose of thimerosal for multiple vaccines, a cause of autism? Epidemiologists once again examined data on vaccine use and autism to search for any link. But again, large-scale studies in Finland and the United States found no association between exposure to thimerosal-containing vaccines and the incidence of autism. The repeated failure to detect a causal link between vaccination and autism in large controlled studies in many countries reassured many people of the safety of vaccines. But that failure raised the question of why couldn't any other scientist repeat Wakefield's findings? Some critics had pointed out that the subjects in the initial study were not a random sample of children. They had been selected because of their combination of symptoms and the proximity of their onset to MMR vaccination. Even if the children were a random group, statistically speaking, a study is more likely to detect a spurious association in such a small sample of 12. Perhaps the contradiction between larger studies and Wakefield's were a matter of study design or of small numbers. No, the explanation was worse. Much worse. Lies and more lies. On February 18, 2004, 6 years after the publication of the initial report in The Lancet, Brian Deer, a journalist for London's Sunday Times, went to the journal's office to meet with the editor-in-chief and several senior staff. Over the course of 5 hours, he shared what he had learned in 4 months of investigation into the research and researchers involved in the original study published in 1998. His revelations would eventually unravel not only the vaccine autism story, but several careers. Deer's first bombshell was that funding for Wakefield's research, about $90,000, had been arranged by a law firm that was preparing a product liability lawsuit against vaccine manufacturers. This fact raised the question of a conflict of interest. Had Wakefield's research and the study's findings been tainted by the aims of the lawsuit and the source of Wakefield's funding? The second stunner was that several of the children in the study were those of clients of the law firm who were to be plaintiffs in the lawsuit. The affected children did not just happen to appear at the Royal Free Hospital, but were referred to Wakefield as part of building a case for a lawsuit. This fact raised the issue of ethical medical practice. Were the children being studied to understand the cause of their symptoms or to prepare a lawsuit? The third disturbing issue was that neither of these facts were disclosed in the Lancet article, nor to most of Wakefield's co-authors. The editor of The Lancet was shocked. Several of Wakefield's co-authors were angry. 2 weeks after Deer published his story in the Sunday Times, 10 co-authors, but not Wakefield himself, issued a retraction of the interpretation raised in the paper of a possible causal link between the MMR vaccine and autism. Journalist Deer subsequently discovered that beyond the research funding, Wakefield had personally received a much larger amount in fees, about $750,000, from the same law firm over a period of many years. The possibility that Wakefield's study had been tainted by undisclosed conflicts of interest and medical misconduct, and the impact the purported vaccine autism link had on public health prompted the British Medical Licensing Board, the General Medical Council, to launch an official investigation. The inquiry took 2.5 years and called 36 witnesses. In 2010, the General Medical Council found that Wakefield's conduct had been dishonest, irresponsible, and misleading, and that he had acted, quote, contrary to his duties as a medical practitioner and with, quote, callous disregard toward the children he had studied. The board found Wakefield guilty of serious professional misconduct and ordered him stripped of his right to practice medicine. Further investigation by Deer revealed that most, if not all, of the children's cases in the original article were reported inaccurately or misrepresented to such a degree that the British Medical Journal declared the study not just scientifically and ethically flawed, but, quote, an elaborate fraud. The Lancet officially retracted the entire original article. Consequences. Although no causal link to autism was confirmed, the increased concern over vaccine safety and the subsequent decline in vaccination rates had effects on public health. Before the introduction of a measles vaccine in 1968, Great Britain frequently experienced measles epidemics that struck as many as 500,000 people. Once most of the population was vaccinated, measles became relatively rare, and those cases originated outside of the country. But in 2007 to 2008, a decade after Wakefield's article, 2,347 cases were reported, as many in the previous 11 years combined, and measles has become reestablished in Britain. Child vaccination rates have since rebounded to above 90%, but the disease remains a challenge due to the large numbers of teenagers who were not vaccinated as children during the autism controversy. In the United States, vaccination has long been mandatory for school-aged children. However, exemptions may be given for medical reasons as well as for religious or, quote, philosophical reasons in most states. The rate of non-medical exemptions increased over the period of 2000 to 2011 to about 2% nationally, and several individual states have exemption rates greater than 5%. Moreover, there are geographic pockets of communities with much higher rates of unvaccinated people. Measles was declared eliminated in the United States in 2000, when the only cases of the disease were imported from foreign visitors. Since that time, however, numerous outbreaks of the disease have occurred, largely among unvaccinated individuals and groups. In 2014, 607 people in 27 states were infected, the largest number since 2000. The threat of the importation of measles and further outbreaks remains high, because an estimated 20 million cases occur per year worldwide, and the disease is very contagious. Measles remains one of the leading causes of death among young children. Almost 115,000 children died in 2014. That is a frightening statistic, but it is 1/5 of the number of deaths that occurred in 2000, thanks to the efforts that have immunized over 80% of the children around the globe. A second important consequence of the vaccine autism controversy is that it drew attention, energy, and resources away from investigations into the actual cause of the syndrome. There has long been evidence of strong genetic influence on the occurrence of autism, with males and twins and siblings of autistic children having much greater incidence of autism. In recent years, several gene mutations associated with autism have been identified that provide important leads into understanding the genetic and neurological basis of the syndrome. Despite the massive epidemiological evidence to the contrary, and advances in understanding the role of genes in autism, the vaccine autism link has been difficult to vanquish in the public mind. A 2015 Gallup poll of American adults revealed that 6% believe that vaccines cause autism, 42% believe they don't, and 52% were unsure. End of chapter questions. 1. Considering the steps in the scientific process summarized in the appendix, how did the scientific process initially struggle in the vaccine autism controversy? There was limited scientific evidence that actually supported it. You had actual report of cases, and since you didn't have the conflicts of interest revealed early on, the bad data got a lot more legs than it should have. How did the scientific process succeed? It succeeded because people tried to replicate the results and they couldn't. And being unable to replicate the results led to further investigation. For discussion, in your view, what appears to be the strongest evidence against a link between vaccination and autism? The inability of people to replicate the results and the fact that large-scale studies don't show a difference. The following table presents the incidence of autism and related disorders in Danish children who received or did not receive the MMR vaccine in 1991 and 1998. All right, it asks you guys to calculate a frequency. We're not going to be able to do that. Compare that here. You're not going to do that. The R in MMR stands for rubella, a disease caused by the rubella virus. While rubella is a short-term and mild infection in many people, the virus can cause congenital rubella syndrome, CRS, in infants born to infected mothers. CRS syndrome includes cataracts, deafness, heart infects, and intellectual disabilities. In 1964 to 65, before a vaccine was available, a rubella epidemic swept the United States, affecting approximately 12.5 million people. During the outbreak, 11,000 pregnant women lost their babies, 2,100 newborns died, and 20,000 babies were born with CRS. Today, fewer than 10 cases of rubella occur in the United States per year, all of which result from exposure outside the country. Offer one argument for and one argument against continuing rubella vaccination in the United States. The argument against would be the incidence is so low that whatever risk associated with continued vaccination might outweigh the benefit. But I don't even, I'm not about that. I'm about once you have the thing eradicated, you keep, you continue with the successful vaccination program. That way you don't allow the disease to, you know, reestablish is the word I was looking for. Also, the MMR vaccine is super safe, super effective, and it's already in there. So why not? But yeah, that was fun. That is the prelude and the preface and chapters 1 and 2 of that book. I'm gonna leave it at that. I really hope that second chapter speaks directly to the anti-vax attitudes that we see out here today. I think, to be quite honest with you, most of it is just straight up religious nonsense, but some of it where they do try to make an argument, sometimes they go to something like side effects. Some people once in a while will hit you with some type of natural immunity nonsense. But for the most part, you do still hear people touting this erroneous link between autism and vaccines. And it's really a shame that people don't realize not just that that doesn't seem to be the case scientifically, but so they don't realize that they're wrong. That's unfortunate. Number two, that they're wrong in a way that has such severe consequences, but that the entire thing was really a scam, right? And that's sort of the lesson of that story, is that even when science can correct its own errors, when this type of thing happens, the consequences are often severe. They can be fatal, and unfortunately, they're long-lasting. As many are well aware, we are still combating misinformation about vaccines, and unfortunately, people are continuing to produce, it seems like, more vaccine misinformation than ever at an alarming rate. And so I think we've seen a little bit of both in these stories, sort of the heroism of the risk and sort of scientists literally putting their lives and their bodies on the line for their data. But we've also seen the negative results of, quite frankly, just corrupt and unethical science. It's unfortunate that we're still battling so much misinformation right now, but that is in fact the case, and I think it's why this type of education is really important. Anyway, that's gonna do it for me. I'm gonna wrap it up. Come link up with the gang. We are at the Bundy Ranch. I'm gonna make myself some dinner, and I'm sure we'll watch some shows and have some fun tonight. We've been playing different channels, different movies, different things overnight, be it Comedy Central stuff or music videos, or we're so much freer and gather to share whatever we want, and different people stream different types of gangs. So come link up with us again. If you don't know how, I'll send you the links and passwords via email. All you need to do is join our Discord and then send me a direct message on Discord. That'll also help you establish a direct line to me when you need it. But yeah, go ahead and shoot me your email address. I'll send you an email with the links and password. You can come link up with us at the Bundy Ranch. In the meantime, find Biden's documents. Find Biden's documents. We've only got a little bit more than a week left. Want to make sure we get that done. Definitely will be rewarding all of you that do that. All you need to do is go into all of your gather links, explore them, explore all the rooms, find the documents, take a screenshot, and then send me a private message on Discord with the screenshot, and I will keep track of how many of the locations you found. So again, the keys to the kingdom are to send me a direct message on Discord. Thank you guys so much for the compliments. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the encouragement. Definitely a different type of content out here. So I'm glad you guys are enjoying it, and I really do appreciate the encouragement. And yeah, we'll keep going, and we'll see you tomorrow. In the name of the Darwin, the Dawkins, and the Christopher Hitchens, thank you all so much. Science bless you. Poof!
Why she wanna leave me alone? Saying all I do is wrong. No rights when they been left turns. Playing that she gotta let it burn. Saying that the hell's not a home. Sunshine cause you heard it all before. Sometimes she don't wanna be alone. Most times she don't want me gone. She don't know I try my all. She don't know I sprung in the sun, but I'm going in the winter, so we good to the fall. Remember how I told you I get it and I win. Now I got it, you ain't answer my call. Wonder if I've been moving too strong. Maybe I just been moving too balls. Really hate when the feeling get lost. Nowadays she just dodge my calls. In the game throwing laws like Paul. Young legend Miss John like Wall. And I wish you never met like Carl. Dick game lay it down like law. Made plans but you canceled them all. I was just trying to splurge in the mall. Now I'm home stacking bread till you call. It's time to roll. She tryna slide. We smoking Zah. Stop acting shy. Cause you a demon when I get between your thighs, girl. You like my rib, you know I need you by my side, girl. It's time to roll. She tryna ride. We smoking. Stop acting shy. Cause you a demon when I get between your thighs, girl. You like my rib, you know I need you by my side, girl.
We smoking that side. I'm trying to get high. She said that she not ready for love, stop wasting my time. I got demons in my closet, I can't hide. I did all my exes wrong, they wish I died. Damn, I tried. They won't believe me when I say this. Oh my God, what a blessing. Hello Phoenix, that's my twin. I told these hoes they won't get my heart again, not again. Cause they went missing when I needed just a friend.
They went missing, yeah, they always missing. They don't want no smoke, they hit the